Boy, is it hot. Oh boy. Whew. It's a sweltering summer. Listen, I just got finished doing a couple of videos on a Jewish rabbi by the name of Rabbi Slifkin in his book Challenge of Creation, where he argues that Genesis and evolution are ultimately reconcilable. That is not a position, that is not an idea that I will take any position on, because that's not my place here on the Continuing Hypothesis is True channel. I am not a theologian, and I'm not going to tell the Orthodox Jewish faith community what to believe. I do note with concern that the ultra-Orthodox Jews have banned his book. Since I'm not a member of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, I don't, I want to tread very carefully here. I want to say, for one thing, I have the utmost of respect for the Jewish faith tradition and Jewish contributions to medicine, law, science, business ethics throughout history. I will not tolerate any anti-Semitic comments, no propaganda from David Duke or the KKK or anything on this channel, and that I want to address the rationales behind banning the book, and I also want to address something a little bit, if I have time, about the blind watchmaker idea concept and where I actually disagree with the philosophy behind that. Okay, this is a very polarized debate, and on the one side you have kind of a theocratic argument where we can ban a book because we're appointed by God to ban a book, and that I would say is that I would say is dangerous in a democracy to have that. And then on the other side, you also have these so-called, we're the technocrats, we're the experts, and if you have any kind of religious belief, you're on a lower stage of human evolution because we're the next step of human evolution, we're the transhumanists, and that also is dangerous to a democracy. So you have the Ayatollah on one side and you have eugenicism on the other side. Both of these point to a reactionary and pre-Enlightenment notion of humanity, where humanity has stepping stones. Frankly, it might be in some ways that the eugenicists or the kind of secular totalitarian side might be worse. But it's curious where they both have something in common. It's curious that they both have the argument in common of your ordinary human reason. Your limited mind cannot comprehend our truth. Now, I would say that that's dangerous as a concept, whether it's couched in religious terms, such as the argument against Rabbi Slifkin that, well, you're trying to take that human reason and then project it back onto questions of origins. You're in big trouble because, we speak for God, and only we can have pronouncements of that nature. And then on the secular side, you might have people who I've noted very similar arguments that, well, it's not stated in quite the same way. It has a whole lot more to do with a kind of intellectual arrogance, or the idea of, I have this understanding and you don't. But see, I believe that the actual spirit of empirical science, in a lot of ways, is very simple. And that is, you build on human reason, and you try to extend it outward, and you do so humbly. And the failure to do that means that any idea can then be put forth and be accepted as truth because, well, your human reason, you may think that such and such is true, but we say the contrary, and we speak for God. That can lead to a very dangerous place. Or we speak for the dialectic of history, in the case of the more secular form of it, in the case of, let's say, Marxist-Leninism. Sure, the Communist Party claimed to be quote-unquote scientific, but the science they were talking about was not investigative science. It was pure deductive science, where you would take supposedly known laws of history and then apply them to situations. You couldn't question those laws themselves. Now, what's interesting is that in the case of the secular form of the ideology, Marxism, it started off very much within the Western democratic and the Western rational tradition. Marx himself was a Democrat who supported the 1848 revolutions. But by the time it got to Lenin and Stalin, it became a cult in its own right. It became a form of following the leader and obeying. And I think it's dangerous when we fall into the trap of following the leader and obeying. Now, I think that there are some arguments against Rabbi Slifkin's book that are extraneous, and the number one argument against it is that he's taking the logic of today's laws of science and attempting to project them backwards, and we don't know if that can be done or not. And that's the best argument against science. No, we don't. Maybe we can't. But I believe the failure to at least try to apply human reason to the questions of life and its origins is a failure that will lead to accepting authoritarianism. Now, were there some scientific issues with the book? I did note the embryo issue. I noted that one. I remember reading at the time, I remember thinking, I thought scientists had kind of poo-pooed that one. And there might be some issues around the thumb of the panda and sort of footballs between the Goldians and the adaptationists. Okay, but those are extraneous, because if you don't accept well, first of all, the detractors of the book were quoting from scientists that they themselves would freely admit subscribe to the idea that you can take human reason and project it back. So there's a little bit curious argument there. Rabbi Slifkin noted examples that no scientist questions, and that is, first of all, that there are geological layers and different creatures living at different eras, okay, suggesting that life on Earth is layered in the different geological ages. That cannot be questioned. The evidence for an old Earth is also not questionable, that the Earth is billions of years old. And I would wonder if his detractors would admit that in lieu of, that if they did accept the idea that you could take today's laws of science and project them backwards and use reason to investigate, that whether or not they would accept evolution as the most likely probability. I'd be curious how they would answer that, because that does cut to the chase. I would say that to address the other side of the debate here, the extreme, the idea, let's say, that science implies atheism, that is not their arguments are riddled with logical flaws. Science does not imply atheism. Categorically not. For instance, the blind watchmaker argument. The blind watchmaker argument is philosophically flawed. It takes the old William Paley argument that, well, you see, if you find a watch on the beach, you have to conclude that it was made. Well, how much more so would a universe of all these fine-tuned laws and mathematical formulas, that would have to be designed also. The blind watchmaker argument then turns around and says, well, yeah, but look at how imperfect the design is. Look at the fact that the eye has this flaw and the other flaw, what that really means is no, that there was no purposeful design. Actually, no, it doesn't mean that. Because we cannot take our notion of what a purposeful design would be and project it onto, if one believes in God, an infinite intelligence. That is not logical. That is flawed. The idea that, well, because a fish lived in a cave and had an eye, and then over millions of years the fish lost the eye, therefore the eye is not a perfect design. No, that doesn't mean anything, because it could very well be the will of an infinite creator to have that fish once have an eye and then lose the eye. In fact, that would be the classical, something akin to the classical monotheist tradition, not necessarily the millions of years part, or the evolution part, but the idea that it may be God's will that there be things in the existence that we would call imperfect. And that would be, there again, we would get into issues of religion and theology, things that cannot be addressed through simplistic arguments based on empirical science. You know, most of religion is experiential. People have had experiences of the divine. People have had in all religions. People have had spiritual experiences, and I believe that these cannot be explained away by neuroscience, and they cannot be explained away by naturalistic arguments. So I think that there's that the polarized Western dialectic of science and religion has gotten too polarized, and I think that's dangerous to democracy. Thank you.